I getcha.
Yeah, and then but no, I like I'm gonna come from nothing into straight into some gay stuff. Uh, I like a what are they called? The caramel apple teenies.
The apple teenies. Yeah, yeah,
I
yeah.
like the occasional caramel apple
They
teeny.
have
They're
that one that's
delicious.
called the blow job, and it's basically like whipped cream on top of like some sort of coffee liqueur. But the way you're supposed to drink it is like you put it in your mouth, and then you turn your head back. So you put your lips all around the shot glass, like you're blowing a dude, and then you tilt your head back and you drink the whole thing with the whipped cream and all. So it's kind of like jizz is going into your mouth at the at the same time.
I'm
Like
glad.
you get the concept of the drink, the blowjob. Like it's like who invented that? Like come on, guy. uh,
Well,
but
probably a gay guy, I would
yeah,
imagine, right? Or a
I
chick.
drink. I want a drink that makes it feel like I'm taking a dude's load as I'm drinking it.
But I don't want the commitment associated with blowing a guy. I don't want to have to. I don't want to have to work my. Are you making slurping noises?
Just the simulation
Oh, okay. You want
of
me to do it? Because I'm the one on camera that has to do the
yeah, you gotta
pantomiming,
yeah, the pants. Exactly.
like
So
I'm
if there's
blowing
a
two guys, and it's never just like one guy. I always have to double gay it and then have like two.
like you're skiing.
Yeah. Well, that's a different. That's a hand job, right?
Oh
But
yeah,
like
yeah. That's
this one is like if you're flying out of control down the slopes or whatever, and you've got your sticks, and you're like, ah, yeah.
yeah.
So
Because nobody like I don't know. I mean, I'm not one to like watch gay porn or anything, so I don't know if that's an actual
mm, mm-hmm,
maneuver.
mm-hmm.
The skiing,
You know what?
the
You know
skiing.
what? Dave Attell says. Dave Attell said, "I've watched porn all the time. I've run out of porn to watch, as a matter of fact, and now I just I've even gone to watching gay porn. I just pretend like it's two guys who got there really early.
I'm just waiting for a chick to show.
It's got to get started."
Yeah, that's how you do it, I guess. I'm gonna pass on that though. I feel uncomfortable when I see a movie and like two dudes kiss. I'm like, oh, like, I feel like, I gotta look away or something. You know, I don't want to look. I like what, dude? Like I gotta look at somebody and go, oh, like when you're a kid and you see like two adults kissing on TV, you're like, oh, they're ruining the movie.
Oh, gross.
Yeah,
Oh.
dude. But this time it's two dudes making out, and you're just like, oh, like you go see Brokeback Mountain and you think it's gonna be a cowboy movie, but it's
Is
just
that how
two.
they tricked you?
This is how they trick you. They go, oh, this guy. What do they say? The guy with the white hat and the guy with the black hat shooting at each other, but it's not that. It's they're banging each other.
Well, that technically, I mean, if you move enough words around, right?
Yeah,
No,
exactly.
yeah, me personally, I when I went and watched that movie, I didn't know, right? So I watched the movie at the theater, and I had to get up and leave after I masturbated. I had to get up and leave. So
What does he say? The guy, the joke is like,
I can't
how
quit you.
how is no? He says how homophobic is this guy that I just jizzed on his face and he gets all mad about it.
That's that is gayer than cum on a mustache.
It's so homophobic. I jizzed on this guy's face and he's all mad at me about it.
Need to get it together, America. Like,
What is
come on.
going on?
So, all right. Hey Ryan, welcome to the YouTube uh, chat.
Live stream?
Yeah, no, I'm talking to Ryan Tremblay, who's actually in the chat, and
Yeah.
he was, we have so few fans that I feel, not that I wouldn't do it otherwise, but I feel obligated to at least say hi to them out
Oh
loud
yeah.
on the show,
Trace them.
right? Yeah, you
Gotcha.
gotta, because we have to show our appreciation to the fan.
Stroke the ego, as they say.
Yeah, and so and Ryan's been very supportive, so we thank him
He
for
has. I always see him in the chat, so you got to say what's up.
he actually jerked off a dog man. I think was the original story. That's what he told. No, he saw a dog man. I was going to say that's why he came to the show, was because he was like, well, I know how big the dog man's red rocket is. I can tell you guys.
Was that was that with Matt Squatch? We did that show with Matt Squatch, huh?
Yeah, that was one of them. I think that's actually right around the time that Ryan came over onto the YouTube, or onto our show, and has become a recurring. Yeah, see, he said true story. He jerked off a dog.
He was whacking it off. He was out in the field, saw the red rocket. And...
It's poking up like a flower. What is this? What is this peculiar specimen? This piece of fauna, or
does the
what is it? Fauna and.
Do you know the octopus move?
Nuh-uh.
Like, okay, like put your hand, like, okay, remember we talked about you have to do the pantomime.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so put your hand up, right? The camera on you. Okay, put your hand up, regular hand, and then let your fingers like an octopus, kind of like no. Put your hand like straight forward, like turn it. No. Like you're like, okay, remember the game where you put your hands out and someone slap? Yeah, there you go. That's the one right there.
All right, I'm holding
down. Yeah, now if you put your hands like make an octopus with your hands. That's like the best way to describe it. Is like, yeah, now you put your fingers like make them lazily.
Oh,
is
it kind of like this? Kind of like a.
Yeah, there you go.
That's
and
how
then
you stroke off a dog man.
Yeah, and then on the head. Yeah, there you go.
Okay.
You got that.
Is that a hand job technique? Did I just jerk off the audience? Is this one of those VR experiences for people to watch? Like,
that is a hand job technique. If
get
you
jerked off by Tom on You Had Me at Bigfoot.
Yeah. If you go to any Asian massage, they call it nuru, and you tell them at the end, the octopus, they'll know. Trust me, they'll know
that you get one of these, and that's how you jerk off a dog man. Ryan, is this correct? Is this how you did it? when you stumbled upon the red rocket sticking up out of the field of other flowers, of other dick-shaped flowers?
Yeah, there you go.
So
like, what is?
let's do our shot real quick, and I want to do a toast, right, to the fella who yesterday I know we were talking about this last night. The fella who tried to shoot up that church in Texas, and he went to a Church of Christ, which I'll be honest, like within the Christian religion, and not that's leaving out Catholicism. Sorry, Catholics, but the denominations of them, there are some very conservative ones. One of which being the Church of Christ, a very conservative church, and this church happened to be in Texas, and as I said yesterday, the most rootinest state in the United States, who values their Second Amendment rights. To go into an ultra-conservative Christian church in Texas and try to shoot the congregants is pretty fucking irresponsible. And there was a gentleman there whose name was actually Jack Wilson, 71-year-old, well, he's not retired. He's a former reserve deputy sheriff in that area, and he currently teaches firearm instruction. And he pulled his gun, shot the guy, one shot, clean headshot, killed the guy, and went on about his business. And this is all under
sucker down.
Yeah, and let it be known that I like to do this bit when talking about the shooter. He was a known pedophile and HIV positive dogfighter, Kiefer Chamis Kennerman. He was the shooter, and he is no longer with us. So to Jack Wilson, thank you for what you did, and here's to you.
Yeah, here's to Jack Wilson.
Which sounds like a porn name, right?
Yeah, I was thinking Jack Reacher, like Tom Clancy-ish, actually.
I confused Jack Reacher and who was the one? Jack Reacher, that's the one with the guy from The Office, right?
Yeah, that's the you're talking about John Holmes.
No,
right?
there's
John Holmes.
there's another one. I think it was Tom Cruise played him.
No, that's Jack Ryan.
That's the guy. See, I always confuse the two.
Yeah, Tom Cruise, the Cruise with Terry Crews and Tom Cruise.
I had forgotten about that picture.
The Cruise, where they're the cruise. They go on a cruise. They're the cruise of a boat cruise. It's like it's so out of hand.
When Jay Coop here said, "When are you guys going to tell us about when the show hadn't been on for a few months as a result of Dustin being abducted by, becoming Bigfoot's love slave, and his harrowing escape?" I would love to tell you about that. I would love to tell you all about that story, but Dustin has continued to evade us. So the story with Dustin is, we don't know where he's at. He's we understand that he has been very busy with some transitions at work.
When you say transition,
I always feel bad when I say it. No, I don't feel bad. Let me rephrase that. I feel bad when I say that about other people. But he's in a period of change at his place of employment. And that's not to say he's going from one set of genitalia to another. That's to say, I think he's actually taking on more responsibility, something like a promotion. I'm not allowed to talk about where he works, and I certainly wouldn't talk about it without him here. But he's getting something of a promotion, and we congratulate him for it. However, because of this kind of chaotic period of change in his life and in his career, he is unable to be on the show right now, and Ryan V was goodly enough to step in and fill in for Dustin, and has at this point become a permanent host on the show, and obviously we thank him for that. And I know several people have told me that V is their favorite part of the show, and not the guy who puts himself out there on the camera the whole time and pantomimes gay sex. Yeah. So
yeah,
that's what's going on. That's what's going on with Dustin, and
nice.
Hopefully we hope to see him back on the show eventually. If not, we'll get a cardboard cut out of him, and he'll
yeah, there you go.
And he'll end up being in the corner by the scary skeleton statue. So what are we talking about today? We're talking about something about MKUltra. Which is, what is MKUltra, V?
Well, okay, if my understanding of MKUltra, like I'll give you the layman's, like the guy that doesn't use a lot of big words guy of a description of MKUltra, or what do you call it, like the Wikipedia? From the information that I've gathered from Wikipedia and YouTube, it's basically this government program that existed in the 60s, I want to say. Right, I think the 60s is accurate, right? Yeah. This is like pre Timothy, what's his name? Timothy
McVeigh?
No, not McVeigh. Timothy Leary. yeah, different Timothy.
Different situation.
Timothy Leary, who was like the acid guy back in the 60s. This is even pre him. So like the government decided to like test drugs for like, I think it was like psychological warfare. Like how do we F with the enemy? Like there was some crazy stuff. There's some crazy stuff that I read about at one point, but I think the most interesting one was when they played like AC/DC at Noriega. like it was like you're gonna what was the song? It was like the Shoot to Thrill or something, and Noriega was holed up in like some embassy, and so they just played like AC/DC on repeat. But I'm getting off topic here. I think the main thing from what I understand of MKUltra was like testing psychedelic drugs on like soldiers for like warfare. That's kind of the gist of what I know. So if there's anything else, like I'm not clear on it, which I'm kind of excited because I know you did a lot of the research on this one, so I'll get to like hear about some of the things that I'll go, oh well, I didn't know, like some dude like chopped off his wiener and whatever.
Yeah,
I'm
pretty sure that happened. Actually, we're going to talk about. No, I don't know if that's actually a whole other thing that we can talk about another day. There's a funny story. Well, it's not funny, I guess. It's funny to me because it didn't happen to me, right?
Right.
That guy who went on Craigslist and said that he wanted somebody to eat him, and like cut off his penis and ate him. And
Oh yeah, yeah.
remember I told you about? I think I
Oh,
even
yeah.
sent you the stuff
You
about
were
it. But
telling me. Yeah, yeah. You were telling me about it.
yeah, that's a real thing that happened. And then the guy died, and then I guess the guy's out of jail now who did it because he kind of had permission to do it, but the
Yeah,
state
he had permission. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
was still involved, and they're like, yeah, you can't do that. Like, I don't care how hard he says like he wants you to do it. Like, even if he says pretty please.
Yeah, like what kind of person like that goes like they're just like, oh, this dude wants someone to like give them his wiener. So I'll just let this guy have my wiener.
How dare the state get involved and try to tell me that I can't have this man's wiener?
Yes.
But yeah, that's a true story. You pretty much summed it up. I think we can close out today's episode. That was
That was the gist of it.
yeah, that was about everything. No, you were right. It was in the 60s. It was 1953 to 1973. So the entirety of the 60s was literally MKUltra decade.
Right.
And it was started by CIA director Alan Dulles, and as we know, and I think I prefaced this episode by saying, like, this is the episode where we're going to convince you to lie, don't trust your government and lie to government officials, because that's been like a long-standing thing with me, because especially what we've seen over the last year, 2, 3, 4 years, even maybe, we've seen incident after incident after incident of situations in which people lie to government officials and they get off scot-free for the most part, and then there are certain individuals who are like not well liked by opposition parties who, when they tell like a little lie, like a process lie, so like a process crime, when you're charged with something and then in the process of being charged with that and being sentenced with that and being investigated for that, you commit another crime, like accidentally lying to the FBI, Congress, whoever, the investigators. And that's what happened to General Flynn, a couple other people, that Papadopoulos, this was his real name,
I was
Papadopoulos.
talking about Epstein for a second. I thought you were talking about Epstein. Like,
No, that's a whole nother thing.
He's committed suicide.
That dude straight up was guilty. But no, they those are process crimes. Like, a lot of people get in trouble for process crimes when they absolutely shouldn't have, because they shouldn't have been under investigation to begin with. And we're seeing that now more and more. The more you pay attention to, you're going to have to pay attention to sources outside of the typical, CNN, Fox News, Huffington. Like, if you look at the actual sources and the actual data and the things that are actually happening, you'll see that there are a lot of people being punished for lying to government officials unintentionally. I mean, it's typically stuff like, if you look at some of the examples, and I'm not going to say specifically which ones because I don't want you to be like, well, Tom said blah blah blah. It was like, there are certain individuals who they're asked, hey, when did you meet so and so? And then they say, well, it was Tuesday, or it was the 22nd of January in 2014. Well, what was it, rainy that day? And you're like, no, I remember, like, I didn't have an umbrella, and then they're like, gotcha, you son of a bitch, you're going to jail for lying to Congress.
Yeah. Well, isn't this where the term misremember came from? Like, people, like you said, they tell a thing, like, you go, oh yeah, we know this and we know that, and then you go, well, what day was it? You go, I think it was a Saturday, and they go, oh, it was a Sunday, and then they go, oh, I misremembered that. Like, I didn't know. I was like, it's like you can get away with saying you were lying if you just go, oh, I misremembered it.
That's what I'm going to do from now on, just all the time. Like, oh, I misremembered that I was supposed to pay for that on the way before I left the store. Like,
it's like a real cool thing. Like, okay, like, you're under oath. You go and you go, I blah, 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 swear to God, right? And then you tell a lie, but now you can come back and go, no, I misremembered. It was all fuzzy because it was a while ago, so I remembered it wrong.
You can never
you were lying, motherfucker.
Yeah. And like, if it's something like that, like if it's rainy or whatever, you absolutely should not be charged. But these people who are getting away with it are telling like blatant, bold lies, and like, oh well, you can't be like, well, I misremembered that I committed grand larceny. You know what I mean? Like,
right.
And that's what a lot of these people are. And then like the ones where it's a process crime or whatever are typically stupid things like, oh, it was a Tuesday instead of a Thursday, but it was like 14 years ago, so how am I supposed to remember? Anyways, moving off, that's my whole point is, do not talk to anyone ever. The end. Like, that's it. Like, that's my recommendation. Especially, don't talk to any government officials. Lie as often as you want and do whatever you want, and don't trust anyone in the government. And I'm sorry, I have a lot of friends who are in the government, and they're very trustworthy people, for me, and I'm sure they do their jobs with dignity, but they have bosses who are crooked as fuck, and you need to, like, be as what's the word I'm looking for? You need to be as careful as you can around them, because every government official is out to get you, and that's what we're going to kind of talk about today. We're going to talk a little bit about that today. So it was, and I mean, you look at the past CIA directors, and a lot of them were really shady, and like you think like, well, this director Alan Dulles, I'm sure he was on the up and up, but I mean, like, let's look at some of the other CIA directors we've had, especially recently. And, you know, so it was, so MK Ultra, what a lot of people don't realize, and what I didn't realize, is I thought MK Ultra was just like one thing, right? I thought it was just, MK Ultra was this project that was about mind control and it was just like one big, thing that was conducted, and it was all had to do with mind control and changing people, being able to let's be honest, the actual I want to read directly from the thing. The original topic was the original purpose, I'm sorry. Can an individual be made to perform an act of attempted assassination involuntarily under the influence of artichoke? Now, artichoke was Project Bluebird. That was the actual defined like purpose of it, because it started out as Project Bluebird, moved to Project Artichoke, and Project Artichoke was interrogation techniques while using drugs, hypnosis, or isolation. And then it moved into MK Ultra, which MK Ultra ultimately got caught doing it, and it was shut down, and like everything was destroyed, shredded. I was gonna say deleted, but they didn't have those I mean, they didn't.
But didn't this spawn from like, and correct me if I'm wrong, but you know, we always talk about the Coen Brothers movie, The Men Who Stare at Goats, and didn't it kind of spawn from that, like this? Like I'm could be wrong, but didn't it spawn from like psych research? Like, we want to be psychic, and we want to be able to remote view and do these crazy, like, you know, psychic thing. Like, it went from psychic ops to psychological. And I remember when I was in the Army, and you know, I've told you this before, like, I stumbled across New Earth Army technical manuals. Like, I had to go, they were like, go sort out all the field manuals and the technical manuals, and like I stumbled across a New Earth Army technical manual, and I was like, this is the most bizarre thing I've ever seen. And it was real. Like, you can watch that movie, Men Who Stare at Goats, and go, and even at the beginning it says more of this is true than we would believe, but it is like there's some weird things. But I thought MK Ultra came from that, because they were still trying to, like, am I wrong?
You're sort of right. You're like you're more right than you know. No, it was the other way around. The Men Who Stare at Goats stuff spawned from MK Ultra. So
okay.
What literally, and it's so funny because like people say, if you would have let me finish, you would have like literally the next thing I was going to say was MK Ultra was shut down, and it had to be changed to MK Search, which was two different things, MK Often and MK Chickwit. And so these two things, now this is where it gets weird, like as if it wasn't weird enough as MK Ultra. MK Often, which was part of the MK Search, which came after MK Ultra, MK Often supposedly went further into mind control, specifically like branched out into the world of the occult, so like black magic, witchcraft, etc. And that's where it kind of went into, and obviously this is like the 80s, which if I recall, The Men Who Stare at Goats happened, what like takes place, refers to events that took place in like the 80s, late 70s, 80s, something like that. So
yeah, you're right.
Yep, that's what happened. Their MK often is the one that went into more occult stuff and actually had now and if you doubt that, that's fine, because like 90% of the stuff that we say on here is fake anyways. But there are actually articles about it on gosh, what's the name of the Black Magic, the Occult, and the CIA, which is by Brent Swanser. You can find that in Mysterious Universe. It's an online publication. Again, it's called Black Magic, the Occult, and the CIA on Mysterious Universe. And then there's also a book by Gordon Thomas called Secrets and Lies. And they kind of talk about the how the CIA branched out into occultism, witchcraft, black magic, and that sort of stuff, trying to continue on in their weird practices. Now, I guess it's probably worth mentioning that MK is the digraph, which means it's the two characters that signify something, meaning that the project was sponsored by the CIA's technical services staff, who are responsible for supporting the CIA's clandestine operations with gadgets, disguises, forgeries, secret writings, and weapons. So that's who was kind of handling all of this, anything MK. So if you hear MK, they're referring to the TSS and their weird and their research. Now, what I was going to say,
research.
Yeah, well, that's and that's what I was going to say was the MK Ultra. You think of it as like one thing, but it's really 149 different projects that fell under the MK Ultra title. And these 149 of them, I combed through them, and I would say about half of them aren't even worth looking at, because they're just like, they refer specifically to like funding like lab tests on chemicals, purchasing supplies, research and development, funding normal and deep cover operations, publication costs, and per diem of the people who are working for them. But then like the other half are, some of them are worth reading just for whatever, just so you can kind of get an idea of what MK Ultra was doing. And then like an even smaller cut of that were just like real nefarious stuff. And we're going to kind of talk about the some of the interesting stuff, and then some of the real and all of the nefarious stuff. I purposely saved all the real like the real nasty stuff, because I wanted to talk about those things. And I think that's what everybody's interested in. Nobody's interested in hearing about funding office supplies for the laboratory where they tested
the effects of baby powder on the genitals.
Yeah, exactly. So
yeah. Well, my understanding, and I think that's a good point, because I think the most common association with MK Ultra is the LSD stuff. You ask you ask a random dude, like, what do you know about MK Ultra? They go, oh, isn't that when they were testing LSD on soldiers? And like that was and like when I first heard of MK Ultra, that's what I knew about it. But I mean, after a little bit of like the Wikipedia, that's like what you just explained, is that no, there was more stuff going on than that. It wasn't just giving them psychedelic drugs. There was like some other weird shit. So I'm intrigued to learn too of some of the other things. If I recall, there was some, like you said, nefarious is a great word, by the way, nefarious.
Thank you.
Some nefarious things going on.
What a lot of people don't know is that like V and I will send each other pictures of words that we discover, like as we're like reading something or as we're watching something, and a word comes up that we don't know, we'll look it up in the dictionary, or usually on our phones, but we'll look it up on there and we'll find out what it means, and then we'll take a screenshot and send it to each other and be like, hey, here's a fun word that I just discovered. So, and then we often try to use that word later on in conversation. Like that's that's what James Woods does, and James Woods is he's part of the Mensa Geniuses Society or whatever, because he has the highest IQ, one of the highest IQ scores in the world. But that's what he does.
And yet somehow when Dave Outlandish shows up, we're like, what is he saying?
You know what? And yeah, and we become like total buffoons, because Dave uses these words that are like super, and it's not to disparage Dave, because he is a very smart guy. And like, and I was just V and I were just talking about this before the show kicked off, was that like this dude, like when you talk to him on the air, he will talk a certain way, and he will have a certain way about him, and he will have a certain attitude and opinion on something. But as soon as you get him off the air, he's like, oh, well, this, and he'll tell you like something not totally different, but he'll like come clean because he's very vague sometimes on some of his opinions. But as soon as you get him off the air, he's like, well, here's my straight up opinion on that. And
Yeah.
it was literally like seconds later after we hung up on the call a couple weeks ago that like I said something. Well, Dave, what do you really think? And then he came clean. But I think it's worth noting here too that have you ever heard of Operation Paperclip?
No.
Okay.
I've never heard of that.
This is something that I think a lot of like us tinfoil hat wearing guys know about, but it's not like something that's very publicly displayed because of, and you'll find out why. But MKUltra is actually a continuation of the work from the World War II era Japanese facilities and Nazi concentration camps. So what they were doing in those facilities, in those concentration camps, was the sort of stuff that we see here in MKUltra. And if you've read any of the stuff about Nazi concentration camps and the weird, terrible, awful, heinous experiments that were being performed on the Jews and the Poles and the handicapped and the gypsies and all them, like if you hear about, and the gays, so I don't want to forget
Not the
any
gays.
well, I don't want to forget any groups that were wrongly harmed by the Nazi occupation.
Oh yeah.
So I want to make sure I include everybody. Basically, if you weren't blonde hair, blue eyes, and whatever, and you were under any of these categories, you were practiced upon, especially the elder folks and the folks who were like couldn't like swing a hammer or swing a pickaxe or whatever to break rocks and stuff at the concentration camps. Yeah, you especially got experimented on. There were some really like very scary things that were performed on these people, and that's what MKUltra actually spawned from. And there was this operation that was from back in like 1945, 1959, Operation Paperclip, and it was also performed by the CIA and some fellow organizations, of which some of them haven't been named, some of them have been named, and there's just like other organizations that are not as well known. But they would bring over Nazi scientists and they put them to work for the United States government, and they obviously took part in some of this MKUltra, but also there was something that I learned today. There was a guy named Kurt Debus. I don't know, but he was a former Nazi scientist, and he eventually became the NASA director. So like a former Nazi scientist became a NASA director in the United States. So anyways, that's a fun fact for you. We had
that's pretty crazy, actually. That's kind of bizarre.
But that's that's how MKUltra came about with those people, and the timelines kind of overlap one another, so it's real easy to make that connection there. Now, what I did, like I said, I went through all 149 projects, and I found the interesting ones, and I went ahead and wrote them down, and we can talk about them kind of one by one. I mean, there's probably I'd say about 20 of them that are worth talking about. So here we have, we'll just kick it right off. Sub-projects 3, 16, 42, and 149. They fell under, and you'll like this, V, because of your opinion of hookers. No, it was called Project Midnight Climax, and
that is an awesome name already.
Yeah, and
up for midnight.
And yeah, it's and it actually gets better than the title would allude to, right? So what they did was they had the hookers. The government hired hookers in New York City to use LSD on the Johns that they brought back to the hotel room. Now these and these hotel rooms had a one-way mirror, so the CIA could sit in one room and watch the hooker bring this John back and dose him with LSD, and they would watch the effects of LSD on a person, right? On an unknowing participant. And
right.
So what you were saying, and this is kind of why I wanted to segue into this, and let's be honest, I didn't know it was going to segue into this. Very convenient that Sub-Project 3 had to do with it. But you said being tested on soldiers. That was a lot of MKUltra, but it wasn't all of it. Like,
right.
I would say quite a bit of it was on soldiers, but there was quite a bit too that was performed on unknowing participants in the community. And that's kind of how this went too. They went and they started testing, like, I guess when they got bored with the hookers, they went and they just started dosing people's drinks at the beach, at bars,
That's
at clubs, whatever. And then they would sit and watch and see what the impact of the LSD was on these individuals.
that's
And
insane, dude. That's insane. Could you imagine, like, you're just getting off of work and you're like, you know what? I think I'm gonna get me a hooer, and then you pull up and you just like, like, hey, you get in the car, baby, and you just think it's gonna be a regular old plow and get on with your life, but then the chick gives you some LSD, and next thing you know, you're tripping balls.
yeah.
You're tripping balls, and like, what the and you like imagine never even doing drugs, like having no idea, and then all of a sudden you're just tripping balls.
Of all things, yeah. And it's not even like I've smoked weed before, and like this particular strain that I had was very strong, and I wasn't anticipating it. And so it was a terrifying experience. So like
Right.
these people who use LSD and not know it, and say they didn't have any kind of like background and understanding of what might happen, or they couldn't identify it as it was happening, like all of a sudden the world starts crumbling around, demons start rising, like all sorts of crazy stuff, and the colors and all that. Yeah, that would be terrifying. You're absolutely right.
Well, terrifying is a good word, because it's like, even if you like are a avid drug, like, okay, for example, Hunter S. Thompson, my favorite, HST, he was a big drug user, and so he used the term the fear. He'd say when you're getting all bugged out on drugs and you're kind of weirded out, especially LSD, which was popular at the time, you would get this fear, like this general like paranoia, I guess would be the best way to generalize it. But like, it is terror. It's terrifying. Like LSD, dude. Like, I've done some psychedelic. I've done mushrooms, and when I was younger, I did LSD, a little acid tab, which didn't affect me as like that bad. But I've done mushrooms, and I've had like a psychedelic experience, and it was bad, dude. Like, I had a bad experience, and like, if you've never tried any drug before, and somebody's just like, here's some freaking LSD.
Yeah, and not even like, here's some LSD.
Terrifying.
It's like, hey, let's bang in this hotel room, and like nothing bad is going to happen to you. And then all of a sudden, like the walls start melting, and then what,
Your
Um,
mind is blown.
but
Yeah,
that's
it's like,
that's the funny thing too, is that I guess some of them found out later that they were dosed. Excuse me, that they were dosed with LSD or whatever the case may be, or they were guinea pigs for the CIA.
right.
But nobody would come forward because they were like, well, I don't want my wife to know that I was hanging out with
yeah.
a hooker,
Yeah,
So they
that makes
couldn't
sense.
do anything about it, which was brilliant on the part of the CIA. Like, I'll say this: the
Yeah, that's
CIA
true.
does some very awful things, but no one's saying that they're not smart. No one will say that the government is not smart in the nefarious things that they do, because they
Yeah.
are. Kind of like that on Simpsons. Remember that one where Homer got abducted, and then he's like, "Oh, I can't wait to tell everybody," and then they hose him down with beer, and then he goes to tell his friends, and they're like, "You've been drinking all night, like you smell like beer." Like that's the kind of thing that they do. They kind of set you up in that way. And
Right.
so that there was also another experience that I remember reading about in line with this, and it falls under this same sub project here, that they went to like some CIA agents and a few Army scientists, because the Army and the Navy were also very heavily involved in all this CIA grabassery, and they like lowering the level of like what the
Shenanigans.
MKUltra is down to a term like grabassery or shenanigans is kind of like our thing. But they went out into this cabin, like this getaway, this real nice cabin, and there were a bunch of them, probably like 9 or 10 of them or whatever. They had 2 bottles of liquor. They poured they poured drinks from one bottle, and then all of a sudden they switched bottles and they poured 2 more drinks, and these 2 that drank from the second bottle ended up being, they were the guinea pigs. They were the ones who were experimented on with the LSD laced liquor. And 9 days later, one of the guys jumped from that, where they had that New York City location, that hotel room that they had saved off for CIA LSD hooker operations, the Project Midnight Climax operations. He jumped.
It's so much funny now that it's an innuendo too,
And he jumped and killed himself. And then like that
That's
day
crazy.
when they found the logs from the phone calls that were made from the room, and like everything was recorded and bugged or whatever.
Right, right.
And at the time, because I mean that was the time where like everybody was real worried about the government bugging everything, like because they were, and we now know this, especially based
Yeah.
off of documents from just from this alone. They actually recorded the guy saying he jumped. Okay, was the response, and that was it. Like and it was from
Okay.
like a phone booth outside. It was so weird. Like and like it was the dude that 9 days earlier had drank from this LSD lace. But that was another part of the sub project, and after that they moved that sub project, which later became, what did I say, 16, 42, and 149. I believe
Yeah.
it was 42 and 149 referred to it being or taking place in San Francisco. So they had actually moved the location to San Francisco instead.
So how much LSD were they okay, like this, like looking at the scenario that you just explained, 9 days later and the guy jumped. If he had taken this like a lot of like he had to have taken a lot of LSD to for 9 days later because okay, based on my
No,
experience,
no, no, no.
um
I know what you're saying. It's not like he was still tripping 9 days later. It
okay, that's
was
what I was wondering.
no. What happened was he drank stuff, did his thing, and then went on about his business. I forgot to tell you, within those 9 days, he quit his job. He split up with his wife. Like all sorts of stuff happened. Like he just started making all these big changes in his life. So whatever happened during that acid trip that he didn't know about must have been so life changing that he's like, I'm not supposed to be doing. I need to make some changes in my life. Like he
Yeah.
didn't know,
Some people have epiphanies.
right? And
That
that's what
happens.
he thought.
Yeah, that's the Timothy Leary thing. Is like they call it set and setting. And if you do acid in like a place where you're like not gonna have like a bad trip and it's good, it's like and then they associate it with like tribal stuff and like you know what are those like sweat lodges, and they have these like epiphanies
Right, right.
where they go and they're like, oh, we'll take a bunch of like
Peyote.
psychedelics and we'll go on our spirit journey, bro. And then they come back and they're like, I know everything, I've ascended. And then like next thing you know they're just like a totally different person.
Yeah, they went
Like
clear, as the
this is
Scientologist
like
would
a
say.
real thing. This really happens to people when they do like psychological or psychotropic
Yep.
I don't know,
Yep. You're right.
psychotropic
You're right.
drugs. Yeah, and they it just changes them. Like you could know a dude, and he could be like Mister like suit guy that like you see all the time, and he's like, yeah, man, I'm going to my job and blah 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 blah. And then he goes, and my girlfriend, she's kind of far out. She wants me to go to this sweat lodge thing this weekend, and I've never been to one, and like I don't know what it is. And then the weekend he comes back, and he's like wearing flip flops and Hawaiian shirts, and he's like, I'm not working anymore, bro.
Well,
It's
that's
like,
what that was the whole premise of Office Space, that movie. Like that's what happened. Like he came back, or he came back from his hypnosis, and he was just like,
oh
whatever.
yeah, huh? Yeah, yeah, you're right.
So,
You
and
just like
that's another big thing with this MK Ultra. That was like a third of what MK Ultra was hypnosis. And
right.
but what you were saying is like that he did the LSD unknowingly, had these epiphanies, split up with his wife, ditched his family, ditched his job, everything, and he just like went out. And then next thing you know, he jumped from the hooker room and landed flat on his
Midnight
face.
climax.
Yeah, and
That's
but yeah,
crazy.
that's that was just one of the interesting sub projects I wanted to talk about. The second one is more interesting than anything else. And let me say before when I was doing that that octopus thing or whatever, jerking off the
Yeah,
dog
the
man,
octopus.
and I
Mm.
asked if it was VR for the viewers at home. Mike in Manitoba sent me a text saying felt good to me. So apparently it works.
It works.
So
The
um,
old octopus.
but yeah, Mike in Manitoba, he texts me now on the side just because he can't get into YouTube, so he's got he's got a direct line to the show, and
What
he's
is
kind
he
of
banned from YouTube or something?
I don't know, and I think it's probably because of what happens is we have our free speech in America, which is already on the line of like losing it, but
Hmm.
in Canada it's like way beyond that. So
Oh yeah.
as soon as you get I said roped in to groped in was probably a better term to this
Yeah.
show, and you get affiliated with this show somehow, all of a sudden your free speech rights absolutely go away.
Yeah.
And let me
They
say
go,
also,
just jacking off over here. We're not going to have that.
and now that I'm thinking about it, I did want to talk about something that happened. We got followed by a very conservative representative who's running against Nancy Pelosi. And,
yeah.
and V and I were talking about it. And I said, we need to let her know that she needs to distance herself from this show because I liked one of her tweets or whatever.
Yeah.
And I said, and she followed us. And I said, you need to, I was like, listen, you need to distance yourself from this show because guys like us are absolutely filthy, disgusting. And she replied back like, who are you? Who is this? And I'm like, you know what? I was like, whatever. You followed us, but whatever. I was like, I'm just warning you. I gave her like this very long thought out thing like, hey, if you don't want anyone to ever be like, well, she follows these horrible creatures on YouTube or whatever.
Yeah, middle school. What did that lady say on the comments? You guys sound like a bunch of middle schoolers talking about
schoolers. Yeah, that's that's going to be one of the comments that I share on Twitter here because I've been doing that. Like when people leave comments on iTunes or on YouTube or whatever, like reviews, I'll post them as like advertisements for the show because we appreciate people writing comments for us.
Yeah, of course,
so
of course.
That's going to be one of them. Absolutely. But
back to the
the next one is actually something that was interesting. It's not like particularly nasty or anything. Subprojects 4, 15, and 19 were actually to contract a magician to write a manual on the various aspects of the magician's art, which could be useful in covert operations. Now, this information went on to create a very real manual that you can actually buy it now that it's been declassified and it's actually been released for public viewing. Thanks to the FOIA, whatever. I'm sure the repeated FOIA requests, the CIA Manual of Trickery and Deception, and it was it was their playbook. I actually have a copy. It was their playbook for clandestine operations, but that was one of the things that fell under MKUltra. Subproject 5 was using.
Do you own that book? I bet you do.
I do. I have a copy. I told you I have the CIA Manual of Trickery and Deception. I have the CIA study on assassinations, which I actually just finished reading the other day, and that that was their go-to manual on assassinations and how to conduct assassinations, which is a very interesting book. And here's the thing. I'm going to let everybody in, all 8 viewers who are watching right now, and anybody who watches this later, Ryan and Jay Coop, I'm going to let you guys know that if you go on to Google and type in these things, CIA, a study on assassinations, or the CIA manual of trickery and deception. If you go on, you just type those and type PDF after it, it'll lead you to the archive.org storage place for it where you can download it for free. Like I downloaded a copy of the assassination one and just put it on my Kindle, and I just walk around reading how to assassinate people according to the CIA.
According to the CIA.
But yeah, you can go and you can get those totally for free. There are a couple other ones that I don't think we're talking about today, but there are other ones that you can find, CIA manuals that have since become public because they had to. So many FOIA requests. Subproject 5 was using hypnosis as a memory enhancer, learning aid, or a polygraph deceiver. So like trying to...
That's cool.
Which is useful as hell, I would imagine, because...
Yeah, that's cool as shit.
Yeah. And, I mean, you look at it this way, because like if you could hypnotize an agent to not know about something that they did... Ryan says searches Google now. Have a couple people that owe me money. Easy money. Now make sure you get the money first, right? But they like if they can erase an agent's memory of an event that they did, and then they get caught later, and then they have to testify under a polygraph. Like, did you kill so and so? No. And in their mind, they don't remember killing so and so. Cool.
Oh, yeah, so they can pass the lie detector, right? See, I wonder about the efficacy of these techniques. Like, is there a book on this one? Because this is interesting to me. Like, to me, this has a lot of practical usages. Like, like there's so many things you could do. Like, there's nothing more entertaining and fun than, like, deceiving people that don't matter. You know, like if they're not your family, your immediate family, like you go to like here's the thing to try. Like, have you ever gone somewhere and somebody asks you your name and you just give a fake name? Like instinctively you go, oh, Benjamin Button or whatever.
You give like the most obviously fake name.
Alfred Pennyworth. And they're like, oh yeah, and they believe you.
Ebert
And it's
Eberdink Huberdink, or what is the name
yeah,
that you give?
Engelbert Humperdinck.
That's the name. Or like when I registered to vote in California, like I'm going to admit to doing something totally illegal here. You can go, and when people talk about how voter fraud is fake, I actually found out how many people do it, and I'll give you that information here too. Um, the if you go, we talk about how California has the loosest, laxest laws on voter registration, and people say, no, that's bullshit. If you go onto the California voter registry site, you can register to vote online, and it requires nothing from you. Like it requires like a name,
Yeah, that's
and
it.
then if you go to type an address, you can say I don't have an address. You can type the nearest intersection of where you live, which is hilarious to me because that in itself should indicate that your state has a fucking homelessness problem. Uh,
Yeah.
and then and then it asks for a driver's license number. You can say you don't have one. It asks for a social security number. You can say that you don't have one, and that's it. And then it's going to give you your polling location based on the nearest polling location to where you registered, like your intersection that you live near. It's going to tell you where you're registered to vote. Then you can go and vote. And oh, by the way, California has no voter ID laws. So you can go in there and say, I don't have an ID card. My name is, and my name when I registered to vote was Dick Buttkiss. And so there is on the voter registry rolls in California a gentleman named Dick Buttkiss. And I could go there and I don't remember what the intersection was. It was like some very like it was somewhere in Hollywood because it was like the only thing that I could end up because I don't know anything about California. So I just I went to Google Earth and I zoomed in on Hollywood and like I zoomed in as close as I could and found two cross in an intersection or whatever. And I put that down as my intersection. And so I'm sure I could go there and I could vote. And, but yeah, you can do that. But then I also found out that somebody was talking, a guy was fired recently. Well, I don't know how recently. I'm sorry. Let me rephrase that. A guy was fired because he brought it to the attention of the staff at this school that he was teaching at, that the voter register or the voting system is absolutely flawed, which I think we can all agree with.
Absolutely.
And
Yeah.
what happens is some students came in and they were bragging about how they were committing voter fraud and how they did it as a student. And I'm sure you could work it into any other thing in your life or any other profession or any other area of your life. Is they would go to school and they would have their school ID, so they would be able to vote there, and then they would register to vote there based on that address. And then they would get an off-campus residence, whether it was like a place that they actually lived or a place that a friend lived, and they would say that they lived there as well, and they would have their driver's license reflect that address, and they would register to vote for that as well. And then they would also have their absentee ballot for back home with all their information, and they would be able to vote absentee as well, which obviously we know the absentee ballot is worth pretty little. But it counts, especially in like very close neck and neck votes and stuff like that, or neck and neck elections. But that's how they would do it. They'd vote 3 times, and that was just like some students. Like imagine if you had somebody who had way more time and interest in, cheating elections or whatever. Imagine what else they could come up with.
Committing to it, like going, you know what? Let's sit down and we'll check this out and we'll do it right. You have like 50 people just in front of computers, like making fake names.
Right.
Like, no wonder the Democrats always win.
And that's exactly it. And that's why we talk about how, you have all these, especially in California, you look, it's always blue. It's always going to be blue because they leave their borders wide open. They allow and they encourage it. And especially New York City, look at New York City as well. They just allowed illegals to get driver's licenses. So like what, how do you combat that with legal practices? I don't know. And that's why the voter register or the voter system is absolutely fucked, and we need to sort it out. But that's not my place. I'm just a guy who co-hosts a podcast about, Bigfoot's fingering you and jerking off Dogman. So, but
True
yeah,
that.
that's let's talk about subproject 8, 10, 63, and 66. They test LSD on human volunteers and later non-volunteers. For instance, in subproject 63, finance studies on the effect of physical and chemical agents on a central nervous system of anthropoids, so man-like animals, at the National Institute of Health and unspecified involvement with an LSD project. So what that is when they talk about how they test stuff on monkeys, and they were testing, like they were doing these crazy tests on monkeys that was like the big animal cruelty movement kind of came in when they discovered that all these animals were being tested on with these pretty nasty programs. This is what they were talking about, that they were like using LSD and other chemicals and physical and chemical agents that affected the central nervous system on monkeys, right? And so that was those sub-projects of the MKUltra, which I think I wrote down later. So yeah, about hypnosis, 8 of the sub-projects within MKUltra, 2 of them involving drugs, had to do with hypnosis and hypnotically inducing anxieties, hypnotically increasing ability to learn and recall complex written matter, studying hypnosis, and polygraph examinations. So there were 8 of these sub-projects within MKUltra that dealt specifically with hypnosis, some of which had to do with drugs and that.
Right.
But, let's see, what's the next one?
What was the main purpose of the project? Like, what was the goal?
Of
like
the one that I just mentioned, or of MKUltra
no, I mean,
in general?
as MKUltra in its entirety, I think that's kind of like a good thing to understand. Like, why were they doing all this? Were they just trying to figure out how to like manipulate people or mind control?
Yes,
what did you say?
It was the purpose was, can an individual be made to perform an act of attempted assassination involuntarily under the influence of artichoke?
That's right.
But artichoke was the previous one. But yeah, no, you're right. That was the purpose, was to see if they could manipulate people, and all these things that we learn about. And then there are some.
That's so insane, dude. That's like crazy, dude. Like could you imagine? Like, here's what I think. Like, this is the 60s, like the 50s and the 60s, and like when you think of in terms of technology progression from then to now, right? Like, right? Think about that. Like, you go, okay, we've got from the 50s to the year 2020, or almost in, that's like what, a good 70 years, right? 70 years.
No.
And so you go, well, they have progressed since then. And so we know they're not doing this MKUltra anymore thing now, but that doesn't mean that there's not other shit that they're doing that's fucking weird, like, and then they could just do it. Like, remember we were talking about the gun, the CIA has a gun that can make you have a heart attack. Like, what the fuck? Like, that's the kind of shit that makes you like terrified of the government.
And hence what we said at the beginning, like, don't trust the government and lie to them as much as you can. But no, we're going to talk about some of that stuff, what you're referring to as far as stuff that is applicable now, and why I think a lot of this, I mean, I'm sure a lot of this has gone into stuff that affects us now, but there are some things that they were studying in MKUltra that could still be studied now and have fuck it, I'll tell you what they were.
Tell me.
Yeah, because one of them was like really stood out to me, and okay, so for instance, I don't want to talk about that one yet.
Are we jumping ahead?
Yeah, we're jumping. Okay, okay, then we won't jump ahead. Okay, those are other sub projects that we'll get to.
Okay. I'm like devising.
You're gonna know now.
I'm like slowly understanding this as we're going through it, because it's like I said before, I just knew that, they were testing LSD on people, but I didn't know that there was like a purpose to like manipulate people, or even like they're trying to get people to commit assassinations. Like, that's insane to me. That's so insane.
So
the reality of that, it's like, do people not realize how weird that is? Like, this is something that should be talked about more, and it's not even This is
Someone
a
should be
real
talking about this with your tin. I'm going to add the tinfoil hat icon to your picture for the next episode.
Yeah.
I've finally convinced you to wear the tinfoil hat, like after all these years.
Yeah, exactly.
So
But that's what trips me up.
Ryan Tremblay actually just said, a little off topic, but does anybody else wonder if maybe wet dreams are just hand jobs from ghosts? We actually talked about that. I'm sure, like, that episode ran a little long and was a little chaotic, but we did bring that up at the very beginning where we said that, like, perhaps that was the excuse that people were using, like when they would have wet dreams or nocturnal emissions, and you come down with like these bundles of like laundry, and your mom's like, "Well, how come you're washing your laundry again?" You know, what?
You had me at spectral assault.
Yeah. So yeah, we definitely did talk about that. I think that very possibly that could be a thing, but for guys with like extreme stamina, like myself, you know,
Yeah.
I don't think a ghost could get the job done. But let's move on to Subproject 11. They were developing and stockpiling toxins. That was it. That was the entire subproject. Developing and stockpiling toxins. And one of the most interesting things that I read regarding toxins, especially about the central nervous system, was there was a gentleman who was a part of that study, and he talked about it. I don't remember his name. I wish I did, but you can look it up based on the context I'm going to give you here. I believe he was a soldier at the time, and a lot of these, like you said, they were tested on soldiers voluntarily.
Right.
Some of the tests. He and a couple other guys went into what ended up being a gas chamber, and they had to be in their full gear except for a little portion of their arm that was exposed and taped off. And then they came in and dropped however many dots of this liquid on their arm, and then the guys left the room, and then the 5 that were being tested on stayed in the room. And this dude started losing his mind. Like, he started going crazy. Like, he wasn't claustrophobic normally, but he started to feel real claustrophobic, and he started to have extreme anxiety. He thought like the world was like this impending doom and like all this stuff. And then eventually it stopped. And then the guys came in, wiped their arms off, let them come out, clean them off, and they were done. And that was that. Now, the purpose, he later found out, was to test the the lethal dose of sarin. So they were trying to find out how much sarin it would take to kill somebody when exposed to it. Now, sarin gas is what we know it is. It just destroys your central nervous system, and that's what they were trying to find out. That was part of this whole MKUltra situation. So that's part of that why Subproject 11 was developing and stockpiling toxins. Now, like, it's worth noting that a lot of these subprojects weren't conducted by like the same 2 or 3 people or the same 2 or 3 organizations. They were actually the CIA had little to do, and the DoD had little to do with the actual subprojects themselves. Most of the subprojects were contracted out to like pharmaceutical companies, prisons, hospitals, other agencies and stuff like that would conduct the study and conduct the project itself, and then report back the findings. Each one of them had a CIA operative who would supervise it, but it wasn't like the CIA was conducting these experiments. They just had somebody there on the ground to kind of witness it and then report back the findings. So that was Subproject 11. 23 was to synthesize new drugs and modify old ones to determine their effectiveness in modifying behavior and the function of the central nervous system. Again, that kind of falls into what we were talking about just now about the drugs, and then also stockpiling and developing the drugs. Subproject 38 was to investigate the psychological effects of the drugs chlorpromazine, which was an antipsychotic, Meritron, serpentine, which was healing crystals.
Serpentine.
Yeah, healing crystals.
Oh wait, no, that's a real thing. Yeah. Serpentine is like a rock, right?
Right.
It's like a mineral.
You're exactly right. It's a mineral, but it's used as like a healing crystal for the like the new age type healing. And then bulbocapantine let me see if I can pronounce this right because I don't want people to be like this
Ojijo.
motherfucker.
Ojijo.
Bulbocapnine. There we go. And it's used to induce stupor. And these were all used on human beings. So this last one that I said specifically, the bulbocapnine, is
Popojijo.
yeah. He there was a doctor, and I remember reading about this. There was a doctor who would use this on patients in hospitals in order to see how little or how much they could use to achieve this desired effect of stupefying people like that song by Disturbed, and get stupefied. But she used it to see how little she could use to achieve this affected state, and how much was like the lethal dose. So that's kind of what that one was. So that was to investigate the psychological effects of those drugs. And then also they were trying to use those healing crystals. So part of this MK Ultra, kind of like what you said, was like the weird kind of occulty type stuff. Some of it did fall under MK Ultra, and I believe is what spawned later into, hey, we noticed some real interesting things under this MK Ultra. I'd like to delve further into that. Why don't we do that with this new program, which was something I actually just read about not too long ago. If you look at some of the studies that are conducted, some of them are hilarious. Like the feminist agenda as it pertains to the polar ice caps melting, which that was like a real study that was performed and government money went to it. And it was a total fucking waste of time. But a lot of people will argue that these really stupid programs that are really stupid theses that are tested go on to create new theses. They're like, oh, well, we didn't discover what we wanted to know about the feminist agenda as it pertains to the polar ice caps melting, but we discovered this new other thing that we'd like to study. And that's kind of like the problem that I have with all this free throwing money at every single idea that comes across anybody. But these are like the things that get funded in the omnibus. And like, if you read the omnibus that we recently passed,
that's crazy to think about, because like what you're saying, okay, this is what I'm gathering from what you're saying, is that everything that they did back then with MK Ultra, like, yeah, it's all gone. They're not testing. Well, we don't know of. They're not testing drugs on anybody anymore. Certainly not LSD. But that doesn't mean that there's some other weird shit going on that they can go, well, maybe we'll do this, or maybe we'll try this, and stuff that we have no idea. Like, dude, like that, like, man, like the tinfoil hat is on, bro. Like, I'm like all this stuff that we have no idea. Like the CIA's, like, this is how I look at it. The CIA still exists.
Right.
It's not like we go, oh, we don't do that MK Ultra crap anymore, but we're still around. We're doing other stuff.
And I mean,
what could we possibly be doing?
And that's when, like, even in the 80s, I believe, is when that video came out where they testified before Congress and they talked about that gun that they had where it shot a sliver of poison and it would induce a heart attack. And they were like, this is a real thing that we have. We tested it and it works. You know, and then you have all these people who go against political elite and then all of a sudden wind up dead from a heart attack, right? So, and especially like, and you look at like, I don't know, like Kevin Spacey's, like how easy is it to recreate suicide? You know what I mean? Like if you want to, especially if the person is incapacitated. And we're going to talk about that more, but let me not get ahead of myself. They would shoot these slivers and induce a heart attack. Look at the Breitbart guy. Gosh, I wish I remembered his first name, but the guy who created Breitbart magazine, which is now hailed as like this far right extremist magazine or publication. That guy died of a heart attack, and nothing was wrong with him up until then. But he had like, and this is like days before he died of a heart attack, he pointed out that John Podesta was a pedophile, and that he was like, and he was like the chief of staff for Bill Clinton at the time. But he pointed out that John Podesta was involved with all this pedophilia, and that his brother was also involved. His brother was also involved with the Ukraine business that got Manafort arrested, but his brother got off because he's a Podesta. Anyways, this is all interesting stuff, and we're learning more about it, especially through this MK Ultra, which is why I think I put as the comments for this particular video, we're about to get suicided, y'all.
Yeah, I know.
They but yeah, they that was one thing. So where were we at with the psychological effects of the drugs? Research into Subproject 46 was research into mechanics and effects of LSD, specifically to develop a specific antidote and a sensitive method for assaying it in urine and in blood. So they didn't want it to be assaying. Here's a fun word, to be testable. It's another way of saying being testable in urine and blood. They didn't want LSD to be discoverable in blood or urine.
Oh.
So imagine like an autopsy happening, and then all of a sudden they're like, well, there's no way for us to know. Like, well, he died of natural causes. There was no LSD in his system. We checked. So Subproject 54 is a real interesting one. To create, they wanted to create concussions. They wanted to find a way to create concussions. All right. And how it started was they would like nod a monkey's head back and forth. Like one of the tests was, and this is where your tax dollars went in the 1950s, 60s, and 70s. They would like weave a monkey's head back and forth and try to determine if they were causing concussions, and to see how much they had to shake to cause the concussions. So, but then
could you imagine being the guy that they're like, okay, we're gonna have you're gonna shake this monkey's head for a while.
That's where the term "spank your monkey" came from.
Spank your monkey, yeah. And he's just sitting there like, well, how, like, is it like do I do like hairspray bottle shake, or do I do like chocolate milk bottle shake?
Like, so how hard am I to shake this monkey? Like, no, we want you to like furiously beat this monkey off. What? Did I say that? No, no, but the funny thing was they were trying to find a way to induce a concussion that would put somebody to sleep, right? And they ended up using radio signals, and they were able to create a way to use radio signals to make a monkey fall asleep, right? But it ended up causing brain damage, and these monkeys would often go brain dead. Now, it wasn't necessarily just with monkeys, and I'll leave it at that. I don't want to get suicided for real. So we'll just say it was monkeys, and that was that. But it ended up frying the brain of these humanoids, right? Certainly not humans. And but they created this radio frequency that would cause monkeys to go brain dead. But
I want to have a heart attack tonight, Tom.
It ended up, I'm gonna wake up with like a little tiny mark on my skin. Like, what is? Oh, my chest.
How bizarre that Tom and V, they both had heart attacks on the same night.
let's let it be known, like, we are perfectly healthy otherwise. If we die of heart attacks tonight, please be thorough in your investigation. And then they went on to this originally started in the Office of Naval Research with CIA funding, but then it was ultimately just handed off completely to the MKUltra people. I assume because the Naval Research people were like, "Look, man, we have ethics here," you know, like in the DoD.
You guys do effed up shit over there, right? Like, you can take this one.
Like, we can't do this anymore. Like, thanks for the funding. Here's the remainder. We're out. Subproject 56 was alcohol research determining effectiveness of. See, this is a useful one, by the way. They determined the effectiveness of food in delaying alcohol absorption and the effectiveness of sympathogenic drugs in delaying absorption, and develop a test of alcohol tolerance. So these guys, so you know, when you hear about people, they're talking about, hey, if you go out and just eat a big meal before you start drinking, and it'll slow down the alcohol absorption rate.
Yeah, or bread. Eat a bunch of bread and it'll.
That came from MKUltra, so you're welcome, says the CIA. Subproject 62. Finance studies on the effect of physical and chemical agents on the central nervous system of anthropoids, man-like animals. Again, this is another test of LSD on monkeys. So when you hear about the animal cruelty, animal testing of monkeys or whatever, that's what they were talking about. Moving on. Subproject 68. This is the one I think that most people associate with MKUltra. The whole purpose was to erase and reprogram the human mind. And it was at the Allen Institute. Dr. Cameron completed over 100 human tests. So the Canadian experiments at the McGill University were I think I typed that wrong. But what they did was they would put people to sleep, and they would turn on repeated recordings. For instance, a guy was put to sleep. Like, he came in for leg pain, right? And they sent him to the sleep room, and they gave him LSD every 2 days, and they replayed "You Killed Your Mother" on loop, just constantly.
Jesus.
And trying to get this guy to convince this guy that he killed his mother. Another woman named Linda McDonald. She went through 100 different shock therapy sessions, and her mind was completely wiped, like to the point where she had to be potty trained. She had to learn everything from when she from when she was a baby. Like she was a blank slate, and she was still alive, and she was like giving interviews about it and everything. But yeah, they would put you to sleep, and they would just have a tape recorder running, and some of these people were asleep for like weeks, and like they just left them like that, and to try to see if they could wipe their mind and certain portions of their mind, or specifically like reintroduce new information.
That's crazy to think that it's one thing. Okay, like that's the craziest part about this MK Ultra thing is, like, first of all, they researched all this stuff, right? First it started out, we're going to research it. Our goal is to make somebody that can do assassinations or whatever. And they go, okay, yeah, so we researched all this stuff. I mean, this is like government funded programs that have like, it's basically, no expense spared to their research. And they go, oh man, we'll figure it out. And then at some point they do, which is like basically what happened here based on what you just said. They were like, yeah, we figured out how to wipe someone's mind. We made this lady be unpotty trained. She poops now all the time. And so when you think about that, you go, well then is MK Ultra over because they figured it out?
Yeah, they're not using it for they're not using the information they gleaned from it. They just wanted to know how to do it. They didn't want to actually and again, we're going to talk about that. We're going to talk a little bit about that.
Why would, like, we talked about this the other day, like, well, you're only going to do research because you're going to make sure that you can use it practically. Like, you don't do research so you can just go, oh yeah, we learned about it. You do research so you can go, let's do this.
Now, how could that's step whatever? Like, after the research, like that's the next step is like putting it into application, and then
exactly.
And then the next step is adjusting how you did it so you can get better at it. I mean, like that's just the problem solving model. Right. So exactly. They did the research. Now what? Like, they threw it all away, right? They're not going to use that, especially not against their own people.
We researched it and we learned about it, but we're not going to do anything.
Yeah, you got to trust us. Trust us. We're the CIA, We have a great track record of like.
We don't lie about anything. It's just like they are lies in essence.
I have yet to, and I mean, they even have a manual on trickery and deception. So like, how does an organization with a manual on trickery and deception convince you that they're telling the truth? Like, they can't. So
never trust them again.
So
they literally wrote the book on lying.
Subproject 69, nice. I put in quotation marks.
Nice.
So this is one, and I'll try to knock out a couple of them, because one thing that I found interesting was they did a lot with the Hungarian refugees. And Subproject 69, nice, was to interview Hungarian refugees regarding sociology of the communist system in the throes of revolution. So that was a big part too of the MK Ultra. Kind of what spawned them to do a lot of what they did was because they noticed a lot of soldiers coming back from, or I'm sorry, it didn't spawn them from what to do entirely, but it helped when they were doing like Korea and especially like the Vietnam War. They had a lot of people coming back, like soldiers coming back, who were sympathetic towards the communists.
Yeah, the Stockholm syndrome.
Right.
Or like they get POW and all of a sudden they're like, these guys have it right, man.
And and especially too, like the Vietnam veterans, poor guys. They and I tell my kids this all the time, and I encourage everybody to do this. Like, when you see a Vietnam veteran out and about and they've got their Vietnam vet hats on, because they're very proud now, like they're allowed to come out as Vietnam vets. There was a time where they couldn't because it was
they were like spit on. They were spit on, dude.
And called baby killers. Yeah. And like I tell my kids, I say, go up and shake that man's hand. Tell him thank you. Tell him welcome home. because when he came home, he did not receive that warm welcome that guys like us, like you and me, we got like rock star fanfare welcome back.
I remember walking into Dallas Fort Worth, and there was like, I felt like I was in a rock band. Like it's like I walked out and everyone's like, yeah, and I'm like, I don't do anything. I sat behind a desk, dude. I jacked off when I was in Afghanistan.
And like our war was no more popular than, or I'm sorry, our police action, whatever, was more popular than the conflict in Vietnam. It was the same exact thing. It was very politicized, and that's all it was. And it was built, and you know what's funny about the Iraq conflict is it was started because of a CIA lie, right? They went and they said that they confirmed, same thing with James Comey, John Brennan, James Clapper, all of them, they came out, even Robert Mueller, he came out and said that the weapons of mass destruction exist and we need to get involved. So those are all the guys that
go in there. We gotta go in there. And now all of a sudden it's like a peacekeeping operation.
Yeah, and because we were the ones who kind of kicked up the hornet's nest. But anyways, I digress. Let's not get into that today. We'll get into that another day. But I tell my kids, I say, go and welcome them home, because they went and they fought when it wasn't cool to do it. When it was, the cool thing was to not go. They put everything, they dropped everything, and they went and they fought instead of sitting at home and, you know, waving flowers and calling peace and love, and or moving to Canada or Mexico and hiding or whatever.
And that's like people, when there was like a draft, and like there were people going, I'm not going, I know I'm drafted, but they were just like, I draft Dodgers, like I'm cool, man, I'm gonna go upstate, I'm gonna get out of the country. And then the other people that are going, well, like the Elvis dude, like I've never been a fan of Elvis's music, but he got drafted and he was like, fuck it, dude. Like, America. And he went, dude. He went to the army, and that's like props. Like, you got to respect Elvis for that. Like, he wasn't like, oh, I'm rich and famous, I don't got to do that. No, he was like, I'm going to do that.
Because that's just what you do as an American. I mean, it was kind of the same way with us. I mean, I was 17 when the trade center. I'm sorry, I was 16, about to turn 17, and literally like right after the trade center was hit, I went and joined. So they like, that was us. That was who we were. That was our youth, and it was, hey, our country was attacked, whether or not. Now, like, conspiracy hat me is like, well, you know, but like now the more we know, but like at the time our nation was attacked, and hey, we got to go do our part. And that was just who these guys were. Now they went over, and then they came back after being mistreated by their government, and they kind of saw what was really going on, and then they start seeing these people when they come back, and they're like, well, maybe these hippies are onto something, you know, and all of a sudden the CIA is like, well, no, these guys are sympathetic to the communist regime. Now, what they wanted to do was they wanted to interview the Hungarians, right, and who were going through kind of a similar communist system in the revolution and all that. They wanted to interview them and kind of figure it out, because that was a big part of this MKUltra, was trying to figure out if they could, if the foreign governments were using some of these techniques to brainwash some of our own soldiers. And that was a big part of that. So now here's a very interesting one, and one that we were talking about a little bit. Subproject number 70 was to develop a temporary incapacitant drug, or a knockout drug. Okay?
Oh, yeah.
So, and that was it. Like, that was the whole subproject, was to try to find try to create a knockout drug. Subproject, and there's more to that. We'll find out later.
Like like flipping someone a Mickey. I don't know if that's the drug. What is the actual drug that's called?
Are you talking about a roofie?
Yeah, is it a Rufalin or Rufalin? Is that what
man.
I don't know. I just know it.
Mike,
I know
Mike, what is that called? Mike, trying to get Mike to tell me.
Someone's got to know. Is it Rufalin or something?
Ruhifanol or something? Anyway,
I don't know. I know in the movies they always say slip him a Mickey.
Yeah,
and
Mickey
then
or
you know,
roofie, yeah.
Whatever Bill Cosby was giving those broads.
Whatever Cardi B was giving to her dates.
Yeah, that's the stuff.
So,
but that's what we're talking about here, right? That's something else.
That or
like, it could be
the chemical, like the liquid chemical. So
it's
hard to tell, because again, all these documents, when they were discovered, when the program was discovered, the person who was in charge at the time said to shred everything, get rid of everything.
Of
The only
course,
thing
of
that's
course.
remaining right now, you can find all the stuff. It's heavily redacted, and a lot of the stuff that you're going to see is mostly invoices and ways of tracking the money, where the money went, because that's the important
Right.
thing, that you can kind of
That's
track
always what it
stuff.
comes down to. Yeah, check where the money comes from
Yeah, and
or
then
goes.
where you have to kind of cover your own ass, even as the guy who was perpetrating some of these heinous deeds. Like, you have to make sure you accounted for the money, because if you're going to go down, it's not going to be for, like losing government money. Which, let me rephrase that, and I'm going to correct you, because you said it earlier. You said tax, or you said government money. There's no such thing as government money. It's taxpayer money.
Oh yeah,
There's
that's true. Good point.
So all of this was paid for by John and Jane Cube, taxpayer. Uh, let's see. Subproject 87 was further research on harassment techniques. Okay, this project was to investigate hyperallergenic substances and to provide technical services division with small quantities of these substances. It was to support their requirement to establish an offensive chemical toxin or toxicants capability. So I think this is what that guy was talking about with the sarin droplets on his arm. They were
Oh, okay.
trying to determine what the lethal doses were and what they could get away with to
Mm.
affect people without killing them. Subproject number 94 was investigations of the remote directional control. Now this is going to be a real interesting one, because there's two of them. There's this one, and then there's gosh, I wish I remembered the other one. 142. But investigations of the remote directional control of activities of selected species of animals. Okay. Ultimate purpose was operational use of animals in delivery systems. Systems unspecified could have included audio and or photo devices, so like cameras and microphones or whatever, planting bugs. Implantation of miniaturized stimulating electrodes in specific brain centers of the animals. So what they were doing was they were trying to find a way to use animals to deliver, like, video cameras, or to
So
record their
like
enemies.
putting a bug on a bug, basically. Like putting a
Yes.
bug on a bug.
Now, and
That's
it's not only
interesting.
that. It's not only that. It was also like animals, so like donkeys, horses, animals that you would normally see in a location, so that people wouldn't be suspicious. Like, oh, here comes a stray dog. We're used to seeing
Well,
stray
I never see
dogs,
donkeys there anywhere.
right? So like, you wouldn't put a
So
donkey
why
with a
is there a
camera.
donkey in this
And why does he
neighborhood?
got?
They
Why
might,
does he have a boom mic? All like, what's this donkey with a boom mic?
it's all
Um,
attached to his head. A
but
boom mic.
but they were doing that with these animals. But also, when it says, it leads me to wonder. Now, this is me speculating. Were they, when they talk about delivery systems, I immediately think of chemical and biological warfare, because you think of like fleas,
Oh yeah,
mosquitoes, flies, and like
that's a valid
somehow,
theory.
yeah, and having them carry this disease, and like, you think of rats too. Even you use
Yeah,
them
absolutely.
to,
They're the worst ones.
yeah, and like the mosquito is the animal in the entire animal kingdom that causes more deaths every year than any other animal.
Yeah,
So
mosquitoes and rats are like animal versions of freaking biological warfare.
yeah,
They're like the biological warfare animals. Like rats brought down London and New York, and mosquitoes kill off like countries in Africa. You know what I mean?
yeah. What's the term? Um, fuck. There was a term for something that, like, when you have an animal that carries a disease, like fleas and rats and mosquitoes. I wanted to say it was rickets. It's not rickets. It's
Pig
not.
for wingworm.
No, that's not the one either. No, there was a term for it, but it doesn't matter.
Lyme
It
disease.
was part of our board packet. Like, you had to memorize it. Well, you probably didn't, because you kind of just walked
No,
in and you were like,
yeah.
whatever. But like, it was part of
They go,
the
you sat through everybody else's board. Now we're going to ask you the same questions that you just heard everybody else answer.
yeah. So no, there was a it was a term that we had to memorize for the the field sand or the
Let's
first
just
aid
go
or
with
whatever.
rickets. Let's
Yeah,
just go.
I almost said rickets, but I don't. I want to say it's something else. Anyways, it doesn't matter. But then they also in sub project 142, biological studies involving electrical brain stimulation for cold-blooded animals. So some of the uses proposed for these particular animals would involve possible delivery systems for biological and chemical weapons, or for direct executive. Or for direct executive action. Type operations as distinguished from eavesdropping application. So what they wanted to do was with these cold-blooded animals use them for the delivery of the biological and chemical weapons, but also for assassination purposes. So they specifically noted that executive action refers to assassination, and you can actually read that in their assassination manual.
So what you're saying is, if you notice like a lizard in your house for all of a sudden for
Yeah.
like
Well, for whatever reason, when I read that,
someone's trying to kill me.
whenever I read that, I immediately thought of alligators for some reason. Like I imagined an alligator swimming up along shore, and you're like, "Oh, be careful! It's an alligator. What's that sniper rifle on its head?" You know, like that's what I imagined for some reason.
I live on the third floor, so for me it'd be like what did he climb up the stairs? He climbed all the way up the stairs.
That'd be the worst possible way to conduct an assassination. Like, where would alligator come in that briefing? Like, where they have to. But that's the funny thing, too. When it was talking about in the assassination manual for the CIA's investigation into assassinations, it talks about how when you are going to have somebody assassinated, the fewer people that know, the better. And it specifically refers to like the person who gives the order and the person who gets the order. That's like it.
That's like straight from The Professional. What is it?
Leon
the Professional. Yeah, Leon the Professional. That's like exactly what they say. So maybe that was like research. The less people know about, but that's like any crime. Like it's like they say, you're going to commit a crime, don't tell anybody anything. Like just do it.
Well, when they refer to it, when they refer to it in the book, they don't want like a briefing of like, hey, this guy is a problem. We need to eliminate him. Does anybody have a guy for that? You know, like they don't want like a group of people who are in charge of certain factions or whatever. They don't want like a group. They want like
gets like a carrier pigeon, and then he pulls the little note from the leg of the pigeon, and it's like this is the address of the guy, and like a little picture of him, and that's all they get.
Yeah, pretty much. And they but it's whoever's in charge is the guy who has to take a chance on whatever guy. You know what I mean? They're like, hey, the guy who has to give the order or who knows that so and so has to die, once they get the clearance from whoever their superior is, they're like, all right, I got it. They don't tell anybody. They don't have, and even like the getaway. So that was an interesting thing too that they talked about in that book was there are different types of assassinations, right? There's like open, closed, and political or something. But it was like open is like it doesn't matter where it takes place, and it doesn't matter if people know that it was an assassination, or if it looks like something else. It really doesn't matter. Closed means it has to not look like an assassination, and then political or whatever the one is, it has to look like an assassination. So there's no like sneaking in and poisoning somebody. It has to be like, oh, this guy was assassinated. Like this was a political thing. And then there's also like there are people who like the type of assassination. There are gosh, I wish I remembered all these things. I didn't commit them to memory, but there was one where it was like the type of assassin that you have. There's one that you need to save, one that it doesn't matter if you save him, and then another one where he's gone.
Interesting.
Yeah, where
So,
you
like,
you anticipate them dying.
Where it's like it's not really an assassination; it just has to look like one, and then you save them, and they're like, "Oh, you saved me from an assassination."
Right.
That's like that's like a political move, right? That seems like a power move.
Yep.
So now they're like, "Oh, he looks like a hero because he saved."
But in reality, he was the assassin. Yeah.
Yeah. Set it up. That's funny.
But
it's diabolical.
The one of them was like they called it Lost. Was the name of the one where like they anticipate the assassin's death, like running in with a bomb vest. They call it a Lost. And then there's running, I think, where they have to escape. Anyways, but there's one where like there are 3 different ones of that, and like the Lost, any other than the Lost, one of them is like, it doesn't matter if they get away, it's cool if they get away, but we're not going to try to get them out of there. And then there's the other one where they have to get out, like they have to get their asset out of there. So right. But yeah, that's the sort of stuff that you'll read in that that assassination manual. And that was so like bizarre. And that was during the Cuba, that was like during a lot of the Cuba crisis. So a lot of it was based on that.
When they were aiming their missiles at us.
Yeah, and like with Castro, who ended up like being the most anti-capitalist guy, but ends up dying on the most capitalist day, Black Friday, which is probably the biggest FU that we can give him, I think. And we didn't even have to try. So let's see. Study in subject. Here's an interesting one, and this is where they kind of get like they pertain more to now than they did back then, I think, and we can actually make ties. So we're at that point where we didn't want to jump ahead earlier. Subproject 103 is study in nonverbal communication to assess communications between 16-year-old children at a reunion of those who had attended a children's international summer village at age 11. So what they did was they went to a reunion, right, at this children's international summer village, and they investigated the body language between these 16-year-olds who hadn't seen their friends from this camp for 5 years, and they wanted to study the body language between them. And I was actually watching something the other day of an FBI body language interpreter who his job was to find spies within the agency, find moles. And he would watch people's body language, and some of the stuff that he said was like new to me, like somebody who's got their arms crossed or somebody who's like rubbing their mouth is not indicative of deception. It's a self-soothing thing that we do. So if somebody like looks off when they're trying to think of an answer, that's not necessarily indicative of deception. That's things that we do as humans, especially as self-soothing type stuff.
Yeah, like it's a natural, like we do. Like body language, man, it's so interesting. Like I really find it fascinating because like even if you like, you don't have to like study body language, but like if you learn the basic things about body language, there's so many things in conversation that you can learn about people. Like have you ever talked to somebody and you notice they like fold their arms and you're like, oh, this, like you kind of realize, well, this person doesn't care what I'm talking about. Like,
right.
Like little things, like you could talk to somebody and they go,
and leaning back. If somebody does that, if they lean back, it means they've made their decision. So like jurors, when they lean back, they've made their decision. A good point. Yeah. But those kind of little things are really effective, like just in everyday, like anything, you know, like have you ever just talked to somebody and then you realize all of a sudden, like just looking at their body language, you go, well, this person doesn't want to talk to me. Yeah. Well, you're not interested, so.
I'm boring this person. Yeah, exactly.
I'm going to wrap it up. I got stuff to do. You know, I'm going to go. Like, you're not interested. Yeah. I'm not going to sit here and bore you.
Yeah. You realize, oh, well, I like to call them out. I go, oh, am I boring you?
Somebody yawned the other day, and I said, oh, no, it was when I was walking through a line at Bass Pro Shop. And the guy was yawning as I was walking up to the line. I'm like, oh, I'm sorry. Am I not engaging enough for you? And he was just like, no, I'm sorry. I'm tired. It was Christmas Eve or something. And
it's like the biggest burn when they're not actually doing that, like offensively. They're just actually tired.
No, I'm sorry.
Like, oh,
I didn't mean it.
That's funny.
But yeah, that's one thing. And then like you wonder how they developed a lot of these things, how they're able to tell if you're lying, or a lot of this body language stuff. I think a lot of it came from these past studies. Yeah. And like we talked about earlier, sometimes the studies themselves shoot
the micro expressions,
things, right?
Right. Like, what's that show? Lie to Me with have you seen that? Lie to Me with what's his name? Tim Roth. Tim Roth, dude. If you get a chance, it's fictional, right? But it's about a guy, this dude, Tim Roth's character, and he can tell when somebody's lying just based on their micro expressions and their body language. And it's really kind of like it was short lived. It only lasted like 2 seasons, I think. But the whole concept of it was really cool because it's like he goes, oh, he did this. And like the way they examine things in politics, and they go, like, look at this picture of Bill Clinton when he's saying, I did not have sexual relations. But then like they point out the things that make you go, oh yeah, like he smiled here, so he's obviously lying. And like the murderers that killed people, and they go, I didn't do it, but then they're smiling. Or like little things that like, it's kind of like interesting, like it's valid, I guess you could say. Even though it's fiction, there has to be some research behind it that they go. So I think that kind of applies or is similar to what we're talking about here. It's called Lie to Me. Lie to Me? I think it's called Lie to Me.
Sounds right.
Yeah.
No,
it's not called Lie to Me.
Well, whatever. I'll find it. You said Tim Roth. I'll track it down. Brian, we'll see you later. All right, he said, all right, ladies, and germs, I'm out. Great show, guys.
Been gone.
Let's try to. These last couple are going to be
going on 2 hours, bro.
I know. Experimental related design, manufacture, and formulation of devices and system. Oh, so this is the one when I told you about the knockout gas or the knockout drug. Experimentation related to design, manufacture, and formulation of devices and systems utilizing gas-propelled sprays and aerosols. So, like when I see that, especially after having just read about a knockout drug, like I start to put two and two together.
Yeah.
And then here's one you talked about. Testing on veterans. Study at the Veterans Administration Center in Martinsburg, West Virginia, was studying the different effects on drugs on behavior, and the drug specifically was amphetamine, and the dose level was 10 milligrams. So that was one where they tested directly on soldiers, and that was it. That was what they wanted to do.
That's a considerable amount.
Yeah, and but yeah, who cares? It was just the VA, right? That's where they do most. That's where they do most of the testing, right?
Fuck them.
Let's see. And then here's one that I think is pertinent today. Cross-cultural studies of family structure and personality development. Now, why I say that's pertinent today is I recently read the other day. Actually, I think we've probably talked about it on here. Of the last 30 mass shooters that we've had in the United States, of the 30 most deadly mass shootings we've had in the United States, the shooter has had one thing in common in 29 of the 30 cases. Do you know what that is?
I don't know.
They come from a single mother family.
Oh, interesting.
So every single mass shooter, with the exception of one, of the top 30 greatest, most deadly, I don't want to say greatest, the most deadly mass shootings.
The greatest shooters of all time.
Come and behold the greatest shootings of all times.
That's so terrible. It's like the worst thing we've said on here.
But of those 30 most deadly mass shootings, 29 of the 30 have come from a single mother home. Now, when it talks about this cross-cultural studies of family structure and personality development, there is no denying that there is a cultural difference in like what families are more likely to be single parent, single mother families, what cultures, what races are more likely to commit.
I get what you're saying. Right? Yeah, I get what you're saying.
So what they did back then was they knew that's what they were looking into. Now, we can look now and we can say that's absolutely pertinent. This is some information that should be either further studied or shared publicly, because there's no denying that 13% of the population is black, right? And 50% of the violent crimes committed, and more than 50%, I believe it's a little higher than that, 50% of the violent crimes committed in the United States are committed by black males. So there is something to be said about, and let's be honest, single black mothers, or I'm sorry, black families are more likely statistically to have single black mothers. Or single mothers. So I mean, these are things that, like, we know statistically, factually. You can't say them without being called a racist. And I believe even the ADL, which is a very
but it's
anti
interesting. Like, it's interesting. So we're talking about the CIA. it's interesting. It's an interesting topic for them to like. Well, we should probably look into this. When like, didn't the CIA like introduce crack into the ghetto? Like,
Yep.
isn't that part of the things that they did? Like, one other conspiracy? Like,
Yeah.
am I
No, it's
wrong?
not a conspiracy. It was a real thing. Like they were the ones who paid. Remember that movie with Tom Cruise that just came out not too long ago, where he was like flying coke from Colombia
Yeah,
up
yeah,
into the United States?
yeah. I bought that movie. It's really good.
Yeah.
American Made. American Made.
Yeah. So
It's
that
good.
was another CIA operation,
That's right.
and so
Yeah.
introducing crack into the inner city. A lot of people want to talk about how the white man is keeping the black man down, which okay, that's fine to say. But I think your problem is not with white men. I think it's with the government
Yeah.
and the CIA specifically. I
The
mean, if you
CIA
look at their track
specifically.
record, and especially what you pointed out about it being a CIA study, and then we
Yeah.
now look at some of these mass shootings that happen now, and we look at some of the crime that's committed, and some of the, I mean, look at the stabbing that just happened in New York City, in that rabbi's home, so in
Right.
his basement synagogue or his basement place of worship, and his and then also there was another shooting that was committed by another black man. They were both committed by black men, and they were I would love to know their family demographics, like whether or not they came from a
Yeah.
single
Huh?
mother, because now we see this in a lot of these cases of people who shoot up, and I'm not just going to pick on. I'm not sitting here trying to pick on black people, because I'm going to say that also that Dylan kid from who shot up that church down south, and the this is a while back, and then also we have like. Who was the other the kid that shot up Sandy Hook supposedly? I mean, these and the kid who shot up in Florida, the Parkview School or whatever.
Yeah.
These are all like, if you look at these particular instances with the thought that maybe the government had something to do with it, it's impossible to eliminate the idea that the government had something to do with it. So
Right.
like the more you look at these things, like you have to wonder, like, is it the white man that's keeping you down, or is it the CIA, or is
Yeah.
it
The
the
CIA
government?
specifically. Yeah.
And
Exactly.
and
That is
and
true.
so I mean, I'm not making accusations here. I'm just saying, like, I'm pointing out stuff here that we know for a fact in this MK Ultra stuff, and I'm
Right.
saying, and then other CIA stuff that has come out and said, hey, maybe like you guys should redirect some of that anger. Which, I mean, if you want to be angry at the white man, that's fine. I'm not here to tell you that you can't be angry at whoever you want, because that's our right as American citizens. However, I will say perhaps maybe your anger is misplaced. So, and then we also have along the same lines, and kind of what I was talking about with the false flag type stuff, like the
Mhm.
Parkview or the Broward County shootings and the Sandy Hook and other things like that. Human adaptation to disaster, response to stress and crisis results and increased sophistication of the CIA's redacted mission. So some of the stuff was redacted, so I don't know what it is, but
Redacted, huh?
it's
You know what my first
particularly
response
interesting.
and I know we're so like we shouldn't talk about this stuff because we're gonna wake up tomorrow dead with like heart attacks. But like my first instinct when you said that was like 9/11. Like
Right.
like what, dude? Like that's what was redacted there, bro. That's what was
So
redacted.
and exactly, and I mean, you look at some of these characters, like you look at that David Hogg, or I think is his name. His dad was an FBI agent, right?
Oh
And
yeah,
his
yeah,
dad
yeah.
was specifically involved in this sort of thing, like
Right.
human, like crisis intervention and stuff like that. So, like when they have something that says results could increase sophistication of CIA's mission,
Yeah.
and like we don't know what means, like you have to wonder like how much people like to call you tinfoil hat. People like to say that you're being
Yeah.
irrational, and that you're just an Alex Jones fanatic or whatever.
Right.
But in reality, like all this stuff kind of makes it hard to dismiss once you actually read it, and that's the problem. Is like the people who are going
Yeah.
to accuse you of that are not going to read it.
No, no, absolutely not. And you're over here going, I'm telling you, man, it's the CIA. They're watching. They're lizards on your wall, have cameras in them.
At one point, you know, it's funny. At one point when we were recording, I heard like what sounded like, you know, when you remember like back in the day you would hear, or even like now, if you call in and it switches you to hold, like if you're on the phone with technical support, and then
Yeah, yeah,
like they put you on hold and it makes that like it sounds like it's dialing to
yeah,
somebody
yeah,
else.
yeah, yeah,
I
yeah.
heard that noise at one point while we were talking, and so I'm like, at this point I'm like, I assume the CIA is listening.
Yeah, they're totally listening. They're
I
going.
know
These guys
somebody's
talk about
listening.
dicks a lot.
Oh, yep. John
Talk about-
Taylor. John Taylor makes a point. The Gilroy Garlic Festival shooter. That was another instance. Like you look at a lot of these guys, and a lot of they're all on some kind of psychological medication. Uh,
right.
they all have like given warning signs that the FBI and local government, local law enforcement has ignored. They've all got these big fat red flags, and they get kind of like ignored, and then all of a sudden they do this big atrocity or this big in this big thing, and it's all
Assassination.
part of.
Is that what you're trying to say?
Well, I don't want to say assassination because it's not, because they kill like multiple people,
Yeah.
and it's always with an AR-15. And what's the most
Yeah.
demonized weapon right now? The
It
AR-15,
really
right?
is.
And when
Yeah.
it's not the AR-15, and like for instance, this one on Sunday was a shotgun. And fortunately, it was stopped by that guy. So all of a sudden, it leaves the media's radar. They don't want to talk about it because they can't demonize the AR-15 because it wasn't an AR-15. Anytime you hear of a shooting where it wasn't an AR-15 and it wasn't a white guy, you won't hear about it. And it wasn't,
Like that chick. Remember that chick we used to talk about?
Yeah. The crazy guy or the crazy lady who she shot up Google, right?
Yeah. Or no, YouTube. It was YouTube.
That's right. One or the other. Well, it's the same thing. Google and YouTube is owned by
She
the
was
same
like
people.
a PETA chick or something, and
Yeah,
but she didn't get anybody
because
didn't
she was
shoot.
well, yeah. Because and plus, I don't think she had an AR-15, and she wasn't a white man. So,
Yeah,
like
exactly.
those types of instances, the times that it's a white man, or I'm sorry, the times that they report are when it's a white shooter with an AR-15. Like for instance, even like the Dayton shooting recently, immediately dropped out of the airwaves, right? Because it was a white shooter, and I do believe he had an AR-15, but it dropped because he was openly involved in like a lot of Facebook groups for socialism and Elizabeth Warren. So as soon as they found his social media and found out that he was a Democrat, they dropped him out of the news cycle. The other guy down in Texas who had less kills stayed in the news because somehow they tied him to the Republican Party. So, and I don't remember how it was because I remember there being some confusion about it, but they were able to tie him somehow to the GOP. So they left him in the news because he was a white shooter with an AR-15 against immigration, and so that was a inherently GOP whatever opinion. Anyways, finally, I think the last one. Here's another one that had plenty of redaction in it. A study of, and this is super important to what we first talked about on the show, a study of the open voting records of a selected group of blank voters over a 50-year period. Anticipated results could contribute redacted. So like what I said blank earlier, I was saying
That's crazy, dude. That one is like, especially because we were talking about that.
Yep. And fortunately, I wrote it down earlier today because I knew it was going to be something we could tie in. But yeah, that's absolutely it. And you look at like the type of people who they are targeting. Again, it's not necessarily white males. It is the CIA.
No.
It is the government. It is like these are the people who are trying to utilize you against your will. And this is all like hypnosis. We've talked about hypnosis, drug induction, unknowingly, how much they could get away with giving you, finding ways to make it so it doesn't show up in your blood or urine. They've found all these ways. You have become a product of the CIA's machine. And that is all for tonight. We thank you all for your time. Thank you, V, for joining us. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. And we love you. And if you don't hear from us next week, it's because we've been assassinated in our sleep and we've had heart attacks. So
please research our deaths thoroughly.
So look into MK Ultra, MK Search. Maybe we'll talk about MK Search another day because one of the things was they studied a Yoruba witchcraft study, an African witch doctor study, probably cover for recruitment and promising young Nigerians for their MK Search stuff that they wanted to do. So that being said, we will see you guys all next week.